Good morning, HubSpot Nation. Happy Friday. Uh, Here for another episode of Let's Build Community Content with Rob Jones. How you doing, fella?
Good man. Uh, I'm green on green today. This is indicative of the new year, growth, happiness, money, maybe. So feeling very green today.
That's good. Green for the right reasons. That's for sure. That reminds me, I once bought a chair. Uh, I was getting ready to do streaming and gonna have like the backdrop, so green screen, and then green's my favorite color. So of course, like I get a chair with some green in it, and then like I had to send it back because it was like blending in with the green screen awkwardly, and
Yep.
Anyways, so you come to me yesterday and say, "Can we talk about GTM being broken?" Before I share, I think an analogous story from my material science space. I would love to hear why that's on your mind today.
Lots of reasons. We've been talking about that, thinking about that for the back half of this year, trying to plan. I mean, it's on my mind because I just see it as kind of a fact. Um, I don't think it's all the way broken. I think that it's more of a like a crossroads, right? Like there's so much. Maybe it's maybe it's I'm feeling it more so, and it's been amplified by HubSpot because of all the updates. Like I don't have as much context in other ecosystems as what those updates looks like and what is kind of being forced out of that. So, but I would say it's crumbling, or we're at this like crossroads of stuff that I know you're going to talk about. Like, what words actually even mean now? We're at a crossroads of the buyer journey becoming, even more Amazon affected. People in B2B want to be able to tap a button, have somebody outside their house in 5 minutes with all their wildest dreams fulfilled. And from tool to like tech enabled to AI now, there's this choice people have to make. I would say that's like get busy living or get busy dying, to quote Morgan Freeman. You got to figure out how to simplify some of this stuff. And Dharmesh said in a post the other day that um, like complexity chases us, not the other way around. And I feel like a lot of companies, a lot of places are feeling this burden of GTM being not as efficient. I mean, GTM efficiency is at an all-time low, which is like how much money do you have to spend to get. So all of that stuff is happening. Been keeping up with a lot of the. I think Sam Jacobs and Jocko from Winning by Design kind of put some of that out. So yeah, it's just been on the weighing on the mind heavy for a minute now, and I wanted to ask you, do you agree, and what do you think we should do about it?
Oh man, I definitely agree. And just to tie it in for our viewers, why Let's Build Community Content is talking about GDM being broken. Because in the back of my mind, although you didn't say this directly at any point in time, I know what some of your responsibilities are at Rev Partners, and I've been running into what I imagine are similar issues where the reason that we are on this show talking about community content, talking about being active in the community, engaging in LinkedIn, in Slack, wherever you need to, even if it's not super measurable, we feel strongly that that is the answer. It works. There's so many things to show that it works, like proven, like all across industries, like because it's humans being humans with other humans, like that's the basis, right? And we feel strongly that that's the answer. If our job is to like help marketing or get exposure or build audience, we have a hard time explaining that because everybody wants GTM to be the way that we thought it always has been traditional, right? And the story I want to share, um, like I come from material science, and uh, so there is a technology shift. There could have been, right, where um, for metals analysis, for since you know since people could do it in this way, so like scrap yards, right? If I want to know which the difference between different aluminums and steels and things like that, I used to only have like a magnet. Like if it if it works with a magnet, then it's steel. If it doesn't, then it's aluminum, things like that, right? Then XRF, so an X-ray gun, literally, came out in like the 90s, right? Where now I could just point, shoot, understand what the metal is, right?
Okay.
2016, laser version came out. And without going into too many details, could replace like 60% of the applications that the X-ray gun did. And it was better at you didn't have to regulate it. It was cheaper to own. It was better in every way. So if you could switch, you should. It like with X-ray though, you can shoot and it'll give you an answer no matter what, right? It doesn't mean it's gonna be the right answer. Because if it's dirty as shit, it will give you the wrong answer, right? But laser, you need a clean surface. And if you don't have a clean surface, if you don't have perfect contact, it will say error, like no answer, right? And so the people who have been using X ray for years, whether they were getting the right answer or not was not the problem. They think laser's no good because it's not giving them any answer and that it's not working, right? And the problem was they were not trained to understand how it works, right? So this long-standing thing that we think is working because we're just getting data. Curious if that resonates at all with the problem that we're dealing with right now.
I mean, yeah, I was the one that coined kind of, or this isn't a term, but in trying to make my own understanding of things, that kind of the HubSpot and Hubolution narrative that we were pushing was not PLG for HubSpot, but PHLG, which is philosophy led growth, which is people need to like refine their foundational understanding of the approach to CRM, to like maintaining a relationship with the customer. CRM's function is to like allow internal teams to know the customers almost as well as they know themselves. And so and allow your teams to operate, execute, and kind of move seamlessly. It's like, what do you view barriers to that as being? Having to operate in multiple systems, maybe like so that's kind of where it was going. So putting the user in adoption is kind of the North Star of, well, it would stand to reason that you put crap in, you get crap out. People being able to put and operate the system and transact with it, like, closer to 100% accuracy, which involves systems, process, all that. But like the user interface and the experience, as well as all of that being built kind of in one centralized location, so more people are intending to work out of one spot. That's a, you know, I'm just 4 years in this ego, but to me that's pretty simple. Like the KISS method, keep it simple, keep it, whatever you can do to kind of reduce complexity at times. That's a good move if you intend to scale, because you can scale problems just as easily as you can scale growth and revenue.
Yeah. So I think your question was if I agree and what can we do about it? Um, I think what's there's a 12-step program to be had. Breaking the lead addiction. I'm going to lean into this heavy this year because when like I did over 350 shows last year, and the amount of exposure to
That's
how people are using HubSpot, how they think about HubSpot, how they talk about HubSpot, like there's no better way to understand problems and solutions and everything in between, right? Talking to experts, right? It is unbelievably hard for me to measure the value and then transfer that like understanding and the value that was created to other people that might want to scale the program or you know really like it. They love the idea, right? But can you, what does that mean, Chris? Like, what is the ROI? Blah, 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 right? And there are lots of things I could have done to make sure I got numbers, right? But as soon as you start to make that the focus, you talk to less people, you have less conversations, you do things in very specific ways to make sure you can measure it, like email instead of just chatting on LinkedIn, right? And it just changes the whole motion, right? Which
yeah.
is why like when we implemented GTM strategy and like most business strategies, it's like what's going to come out of the other side, right? We're investing all this time, effort. We're going to move the whole team towards what is going to come out of the other side. And just because you could get metrics from Google Ads and SaaS tools and managing leads in a specific way, building whole teams to run qualification, like that doesn't mean it was working very well. And I think one thing that's indicative of it not ever working well is how quickly the ROI is going down and the like just overall cost is going up of all this activity.
I mean, yeah, maybe I maybe I've been radicalized a little bit, listening to Revenue Vitals and whatnot. But like I had the same thinking through. I mean, you could probably pull any of these benchmarks. Like, what's a good click-through rate? Like, what's a good email open rate? What's an industry standard, metric for success? One of the ones we had that was, um, e- it was a quick nurture, quick campaign that we built for something, and then almost at the same time, that the concept of a benchmark for a webinar came up, and it was like, well, if you sent however many emails, Rob, like, and the open rate was like 83%, whatever it was like apparently astronomical. And I was like, man, I tried really hard, or I cured. Why isn't it 100? And it was like, no, you don't get it. That's not like normal open rates, like 25, 30. So I was like, huh. And then a webinar sign up and attendance from like registrant to attendance, the benchmark's like 55% or something. Above that is really good. My mind was that like, so 45% of the people either got really busy or were just messing with us. You know what I mean? Like, why why is the benchmark and standard so low? I'm also a huge football fan. So I love Mike Tomlin, who says the standard is the standard. I think the standard is changing. I think just because if you want to double conversion rates or whatever, it's always been this waterfall math with budget to put, like, what are we doing in marketing this year? It's like, well, we have this. Let's just put what worked last year. Let's dump more money into it, as opposed to like understanding the market, the economy, like your audience base as a whole. And it's all for me. It's always been different with coming directly into B2B and not having done marketing or demand in any other capacity, but doing sales. It's like if you're, I know you have some because you sent me something yesterday, but if you're fishing, right, and you lay traps or like trot lines or whatever in one spot, or you're like the fish are going to know, especially in B2B, the fish are a lot smarter. So they know the tactics. They're on LinkedIn and other social media sites and whatnot, learning some of these the new ways in order to be caught or in order to be marketed or sold to. It's everywhere. So there requires this, and there's a lot of people that do it really well. Kyle Coleman's one of my favorites. It's like, hey, you know what works? Taking a little bit of extra time, doing a little bit of research, and then sending a concise, well worded, incredibly relevant email. Like we can help with that, but it's not just, spray and pray, send 1,000 and hope anymore. That's not efficient. It's not the best efficient use. So that's where we're getting into with like GTM, and because of the efficiency gains, and I would say losses in some cases with tech and AI. Like how do you repair that? What makes the most sense? And then what are you willing to agree to? Because some of the extremes are like, well, we just get rid of everybody and let AI and agents do it for us. That's probably not accurate yet.
No.
Or like we just double down and keep doing the same stuff we've been doing, right? There's a
Also,
choice
no.
that's going to be made soon.
Yeah. No, and that's I think if this is last year, you get to make the choice yourself, right? Like I know that it's it's just so easy to stick with something that's working, but it's really hard or that you perceive to have been working. And it's so hard to have conversations right now. And this is how I feel like it just confirms the true impact of AI. Like when you don't consider that it exists now, and then you try to just push through traditional processes and traditional metrics, and like it just doesn't logically make sense. And that's where I started going down this road of how can, and this goes back to 2020 when it's like Google Ads just have this like accepted spend, right? Like you bring me in to do content marketing, digital transformation, and I'm fighting for budget. And just like trade shows, like Google Ads just has this irrational commitment, right? Meanwhile, the people making the decisions don't understand that when they click on the ad, they come to this page that does not even have a form on it, and like the whole process, right? And I was like, how can people, like the whole past 4 years, 5 years, how can smart leaders leading like really successful companies make such terrible decisions on this stuff, right? And like back to the analogy, the story I made, like that acceptance of X-ray technology in that space was in large part at some point people start to figure it out, but when everybody owns the market leader, they just like everybody new coming in is exposed to that marketing leader. This is how you do it. Like, of course, I'm not going to get fired for trying to do something else, right? So naturally, that brings me back to like a couple weekends ago. I'm like, all right, I think for some reason there's like in my being that leads. If we just took that out, like that would just solve so much. So I'm like, where did leads come from?
Sounds
And
like a rabbit hole from which there may never have been an escape.
oh well, I'm happy to go down it and come back so other people can escape because guess what? Salesforce. That's where it came from, right? Their decision to include that in the CRM is basically where, the concept of leads as we know it related to business and how you use it in, the data model and things like that. That's where it came from. And like the impact of that when you're building out, like it's basically like, all right, we're just going to do a bunch of stuff so we can just get leads. It's going to be a big pile over here, right? We're keeping it separate because we know we've got real data in our contacts and accounts and our opportunities. Uh, but then we just watch the mounting like garbage pile. Like, how are we going to deal with that? Oh, let's create a whole team of SDRs that can just sort through the big pile of garbage to try and find stuff, right? And when you're a small team, like numbers like well, like in Salesforce's case, it's like like millions of leads like per year. So teams hired and trained and built to handle like millions of leads, right? Of course, when you're a small organization, You can't, you might not be able to hire anybody. So you get software that does it for you. Right. And we talk about lead scoring. Like, and it was just like this moment when I'm having this conversation with Perplexity about where all this stuff came from and how deep it is. And it's just like, wow, this is why, like, whenever the concept of lead scoring comes up, something that is always, it's the shiny object you can get almost any leader to buy into, like, but is almost never executed well. Right. And
N-
like when I'm in those conversations and I've just felt like just something is just inherently wrong with that scenario. In practice, there are some really good implementations of lead scoring that it can be done well. But it's just like when the vast majority do it terribly, like something is wrong. It has nothing to do with which software you're using, but just like the thought of the shortcut mechanism that we think leads could be leads to this qualification trap, leads to the way that we advertise, right? How we manage the whole system. And it's deep. It's a deep issue to deal with.
yes. Um, growing up, being in, I told you this before. I was a behavioral therapist at an inpatient um, medical facility and worked with kids for 6 years out of college. So like the concept of the bell curve being broken is very familiar to me, right? Like almost in any output, there's this bell shape of like outliers. Like that's what data tends to look like out of a whatever. So the image to me is like you're kind of talking about garbage in, garbage out. I think this shape is still um, almost inarguable of like the distribution of outcomes across whatever. But I feel like it's expanding upward, like the middle ground. To your point, it makes it harder to define what's good or bad because there's so much volume of stuff that's just kind of half-ass mediocre in the middle. So you still have this kind of bell shape, but the middle is now, you know, I, bubbles burst like that. That's what they look like. There's too much tension in the middle or whatnot. So I feel like that's kind of where we are. I feel like that's what the tool and tech proliferation and what, think about access, right? Is like it's harder to trust people because there's more people that are available to be trusted overall. And a lot of them are, to your point, just trying to hit some target, like some ambiguous target or metric for which they're, you know, weighed, measured, evaluated at their role. It's a really difficult, really contextual problem that feel like the industry is going to have to figure out. And there's some good people doing some really smart things to do that. But when you talk about, you know, CAC acquisition, like customer acquisition costs, have doubled in 10 quarters, just 2.5 years. Growth rates have halved, like from 36 to 18%, right? And the cost to acquire a dollar, like GTM efficiency, cost to acquire $1 in new ARR has gone from like 1.5 to 2.6. It's just not an efficient way, like across the board. And even that is kind of the like average. Some people probably feel that way worse. Some people probably aren't affected by that at all. So you kind of have this bell curve distribution of how broken it seems. Um,
Yeah.
what do we do about it, Chris?
I mean, it relates to the if I could generalize the advice that I think, we've given uh when we were doing Wake Up with AI, and but in general what you hear, like what AI isn't going to replace, right? The human stuff, whatever that's going to be. Well, most of that ends up being fairly like what we would call the intangibles, right? Like the creativity, the relationship building, the I see you and now I react to you in real time, like this ability to be human, honestly, right? Well, guess what? Intangibles aren't that easy to measure. That's why they're called intangibles. So if AI is coming and all the advice is saying, like, if you want to like continue being valuable, basically, like let's just throw it all on the table, like uh taking the kid gloves off here. Like you have got to work on your human to human skills and learn how to use AI to enable that, not to do them for you. Also, not to necessarily do all the traditional stuff that is built on all the stuff that we thought is tangibles, while intangible stuff increases. And like these are the conversations that are super challenging because it breaks the way that we've done everything related to go to market down to the where I am. I think the concept of right now is is more important than ever in terms of like you can get lucky with me right now, like with my email, right? Like I hate email. I think it's a terrible channel. And if as we talk through this, it's like we're still working on systems that were built for 1995 when email was the only channel that we had to talk to people, and we still think it's effective. But you can still get lucky, and I can be in the moment thinking about something. I can see an inbox subject line that happens to match, and I will open that email, right? But if I see that same inbox tomorrow and I'm not thinking about that thing in that moment, I'm not opening up the email. And it's like always on dynamic business development when you can be in the community, just active in conversations. This is where we come back to it's no different than being at a trade show. You overhear a conversation, you are in the conversation, and in that moment, you can leverage anything that happens, right? One of my favorite things is to see someone do a post, we engage in the comments. And as we're engaged, I'm like, let's do a show, right? Which normally and this is where it's like, if I would have said, like, hey, I really love what you're doing. I've got this webinar campaign idea that if we do like a 45-minute show, we'll set up this campaign, it's 4 weeks, 8 weeks. Like, no, nobody has time for that.
Yep.
Right. But like the positioning and the ability to in the moment, like what this is where I go to like most strategies I feel from we talked about content calendars last week. You have to create the space for the content to be filled in and the relevance and timeliness of it, like both from a decision to do it perspective, but then to get it done. Like it's just that's how we I think that's how we solve for this. And that's truly like instead of going to market, like in market, like you exist in the community, right? And I'm sorry, it's not measurable. And every time I hear, like, I get it, this stuff has worked, like question of the day or tip of the day in Slacks, like all these things that manufacture, that have been done to manufacture engagement inside of communities. Like, yeah, like maybe that worked, but it's not like, especially when you see that and like there's 4,000 people in the community and like five people comment. And then you see somebody say, hey, I'm really dealing with this problem right now. And then it's like 100 comments, right?
Yep.
Because it's organic, it's not manufactured, right? And that's why I think if you're thinking about strategy, taking that step back and saying, if our like our goals, connection, conversation, um, relationship, is the stuff that we're talking about going to make those three things happen?
Man, that's a big can of worms. I would say that I had another story, by the way, which is really weird. But you had mentioned like the laser versus X-ray gun. I'm gonna forget this. It's one of my favorite stories because it's kind of southern, but it
Oh,
was a
please
story
share.
about this guy um, who said his mother-in-law had like the best turkey he'd ever had, right? But the way that she cooked it was weird because she would do all this stuff to prep and then like cut the front ends, the ends of it off. And so he didn't know if that was in order to breathe or cook different or whatever. So like after two or three Thanksgivings, I may be botching this, but the concept is still pretty funny. He finally was like, I've no like you have the best turkey I've ever had. Like, why do you do this like cutting it off thing? And she was like, well, I mean, I guess it's just what we're used to. That's what my mom did. And so he was like, well, I got to know now. So he's like, hey, I just asked your, this is the best turkey ever. It's a recipe from you. Come to find out, it was because the pan that they had back in the day was like too short for it to fit in there. So it just became commonplace for them to like cut the ends off. It's like we're at this point where without this thread of continuity, I mean, I feel like GTM being where it is this, you know, HubSpot last year or the year before was talking about a crisis of connectivity, which I like everything that, yeah. So there's almost a crisis now of continuity, especially among tech, CRM. Like, how long do you try something before it doesn't work? Or how long do you keep doing something that is not working? There's this continuity thing for both tech systems um, and people, right? The CRO now, the person who owns revenue at 100 million plus usually has an 18-month tenure compared to the other C-suite people and other go-to-market leaders having between 3 and 6 years. CFO is like 6 years. Why is that? That in and of itself, if their job is charged to like own revenue, which by the way, you don't own like nobody but the customer owns revenue. The CRO's job is ensuring that it recurs. And so that becomes a really, really hard ask. Not just like, do we provide value, but can we provide value again? And then striving to like, can we provide value forever? Can we provide so much value that the customer becomes unable to like exist without us? That is really hard to put your finger on all the things that led to that. But there's a lot of continuity involved with, man, we rolled out this, CRM implementation as a project. 3 months in, we're going to pivot. It's not working well. In 3 months, you know how much the thing you just bought has updated for the better and evolved in three? Of course, it's not. It's going to take some time. So there's this like, how do we balance and weigh continuity towards certain initiatives, towards certain things we are looking for and tracking, towards campaign, whatever it is, even people in the seats. Um, and that's to me, that's a fun conversation too. Is like either ending some of the elements of continuity for things like leads. Like, why don't we just call them humans that are not interested, right? Like, why don't we call them something else? Um, that that is that to me, it feels like all of this is not necessarily changing, just having a lot more scrutiny on it because the whole market is like you, you look at the golden age of SaaS and growth at all. The reason all of that is flaming out so spectacularly is because the multiples for investments were insane, and the companies that got a majority of them that got funding or whatnot, they weren't set up to retain people. They were set up to just grow like exponentially. But when it comes to like delivering that value element again after that in perpetuity, that's not how their teams were hired for necessarily. It's not how their tools and structures and internal processes were built. And so that didn't work. Like I think, like you said, I think this is either a large part of it or there's other stuff. But like SaaS is the reason it's broken because you had all these like
Yes.
massive exits, unicorns, all these people that were there wasn't anything hard behind that. Like software is kind of the pun there, but like all of that money and investment multiples that were insane. Now it's like I think it was a webinar that we did, but the tech CXO, man, I'm forgetting his name at the moment. Anyway, he said that these investment companies like BlackRock, Berkshire Hathaway, that had, you know, invested in all this stuff were 2 or 3 years ago, maybe after the effects of that, we're sitting on like $2 billion of cash that they could or could not invest. And that's like, it's harder to raise funding. It's harder to get people to buy into that. But now they have $200 billion, and they still don't trust SaaS companies. They still don't trust some of these places because of the last 5-6 years. What happened then? That's not going to stay that way forever, because people will figure out like, oh, how about we just do it right from the ground floor and build like a strong foundation in the business, and that will set us up to grow sustainably and be ready for growth. Like, the impact of overwhelming growth is great to the bottom line and board and whoever, like, for that, but it's not. When that stalls, it's panic panic time.
Yeah.
So
No, I didn't hesitate when you asked yesterday. Like SaaS, number one reason. And I'm gonna share my screen just because like I really like the reason that it's SaaS, like unequivocally, right? This is not to say that obviously leaders making decisions have a responsibility to make better decisions. But like if you can understand that around like this, the way that we do things often drives business decisions. And when you look around, you see other people having success. It's like it's so hard to uh, change the paradigm, right? And so I really think that understanding where this came from and why it it has decided or defined how we do things, um, like it's literally things like this. And this is where obviously I'm getting help from AI to create a lot of content um, around this concept. But when it says things like this, like perpetuates the industrial view of humans as objects to be processed, right? Just let that like that's what leads are,
yeah,
right? And when we talk about internal versus external customer focus, this is why the internal focused processes and treating people's like leads and MQLs and SQL, you even the best humans must do this to hit their KPIs because it's an object to be processed, not because it's a human that you're working with, right? And if we fast forward from 1995 to 2023, when I'm interacting with the HubSpot sales team as a new member, as a new partner, and I'm talking about industrial opportunities for HubSpot, that there is no like, it could be my best friend. Honestly, it's a good friend. I know they cannot wait to migrate from Salesforce to HubSpot. I don't have to do any trust building at all, but until they get funding, they cannot move forward, right? Funding is on the way. They don't know when it's coming, right? A lot of B2B, like government stuff is like this. Like there are industries, you cannot make them go faster. That doesn't mean the opportunity is not there. And and when talking to the HubSpot sales team and other people in the SaaS ecosystem, it's my first rodeo in SaaS. It's like, well, I mean, you shouldn't have anything that's longer than 2 months, like close date. So I need to close this and then get ready to reopen. It makes no damn sense. And I know why, because your KPIs are telling you you can't have deal. And it was just like, of course we're having these problems. Also, of course, you have a hard time selling into industrial manufacturing because that's not how sales processes work there. And that all is like this cycle on itself where there is SaaS is really good That's selling SaaS.
Yeah.
But when you hear about these implementations that last 3 months and then we cut bait, but we're still out the money, or it took us 3 years and we don't use the ERP.
Yeah.
Like all that money and effort and time lost. There are stories like that all over the place. That is a part of the baggage that we talk about. And I think you mentioned people are going to figure out how to do it from the ground up. People and or AI,
Yep.
right? Because a lot of the reason I'm excited about this content is a lot of it comes from like I ask AI to give me the AI native take. Like, does this make sense in a vacuum? It's like, no. Why the hell would you do it that way? There's so many things in B2B. It's like the the same story as when you as a marketer hate pop-ups, hate spam, hate all the ways that personally you don't like being bombarded, but then you go to work and as a marketer you then do those things, right? It's like that times 100 when in terms of like being able to step back and understand. And I think there's some easy things you could do. I talked about this with Bastian Paul before the break. Um, if you put everything, every activity, now that we were talking about sales and prospecting, but I think it's across the board. Is this thing we're going to do, how is it going to build trust? Is it going to build trust? And if the
That
answer is no, out.
yeah, that's the currency. There's some stuff that's interesting in that. It's like you can't push people into pain that they don't feel yet, right? Like some of this to me is like agricultural. It's like we have 4 quarters of the year. We have, you know, I feel like unless there's some incredibly specific industry like agriculture, that a lot of that's kind of weighted, and there's just not as much opportunity or as much focus or I don't know, allowance context for seasonality of some of these problems for things that now create problems from the top down. It's harder for us to say like, hey, you got a lead problem, and like now we're introducing something from the bottom up. But if Alphabet, Google would have acquired HubSpot, that's a market shift that now requires people to need something. If there's a lot of stuff like that that flows in from the top, like AI. AI is probably the best example with however many billions of dollars spent working on LLMs and OpenAI and all that. Now people are focused on that. It's something that's outside of org control, individual control, whatever. It's just the market, right? Introducing new. It's like opening up a fish tank, right? And like, hey, here's this beta. Deal with it, right? That's that's stuff that's not controllable or allowable for. And part of that is like if you don't do a good job planning, if you don't do a good job with all of that, harvest season is something very particular because that's when you get that's when it's designed that you make your money, that you execute. But you have to do stuff all year. And I feel like to the point of you talking about um, the manufacturing, like they don't have money. I know the whole government buying cycles and all this, but like when they do, there's trust already established. What if they start to establish more trust elsewhere? So this concept of being like familiar, of being top of mind, and then of having such an understanding that you're still interacting, still showing up without the the nudge. I almost can feel that sometimes where people slide in and they're like, hey Rob, nudge
Yeah.
nudge. you know I got a
Yeah.
message from a guy the other day that said this was really funny. I thought it was kind of spam at first, and it was, to be fair, but it was like my first endeavor as a solopreneur failed miserably. I'm here to love to share secrets of like what I learned and all that. I was like, I'm not an entrepreneur, I'm not a solopreneur. It was like, even better. here's here's why you. And I was like, man, it's over. Like, this is not.
Yeah.
I'm not who you're trying to reach out to. Um, so stuff like that. It's like he's creating the problem of me having a solopreneur issue. That has nothing to do with me at all. That's much easier to speak into if I don't know. I don't know what would make this happen. But if somewhat like if somehow the industry is like we're dissolving all all business, all right to work areas, we're gonna do maybe it's a tax thing, maybe it's something else. But it's like you know what, man, I'm not gonna make any money here anymore. I got to think about maybe I should maybe I should do something for myself. Like that problem is not introduced at an individual level, it's reminded to you by individuals or brands or advertising, but it's given to you from top down, from some other external, like above you factor. Uh, to me, speaking like that without the context or without the problem, it's not going to shorten the timeline as much. Like people own their own timelines, and I feel
Yeah.
like the kind of especially in B2B, like the perpetuation of selling the problem if done right is to me the best way because you're not selling a product, right? Like if the choice was between sell the problem or pain versus sell a product, I would do the problem. But you have to make sure that context is right. Like what if they say, we noticed your facial hair, Rob, grows in all patchy and horrible. We could give you. I'm fine. I don't care about that. I don't need that problem sold to me because I don't agree, right? Like I don't need to. What was it, Joe Dirt, that was like it just grows in like that, all weird. Like he's fine with it. So um, that's another part of like the GTM component. That is what it is. So I also think there's a lot of value. By the way, this may have been a shout out to you. I'm not going to reveal a name. We got a lead in from YouTube the other day, and I believe it was manufacturing. But I was curious if it had been like somebody saw our show or taught this content. It was like that guy in the green, man, with his weird patchy facial hair. He's pretty that bearded guy is pretty smart. They know what they're on to. Let me reach out. But that's the kind of familiar. I don't even know what some people, to your point, are looking for, and they kind of find you because you're speaking into a problem. You're speaking. That's just another signal, almost. We talk about intent signals all the time, but we also can give them out as opposed to like prescriptions, right? It'd be easier for me to sell RP if I were to say, if you're feeling any of that, and if you agree with buyers educate themselves more now than they ever have, so you're not in control. If you agree with there's 5,000 plus tools now and less efficiency, what does that mean? It means you should be like 100% assured of simplicity in your approach because you're probably going to have to add stuff and change, and we can help you get that foundation. If you're fragmenting sales and making people not unified in their approach, like, and that's causing some pain, it might look like, to your point, a mountain of dog shit leads, right, that do nothing. We can, like, that's how you give like these almost signals of stuff you might be feeling or thinking about out loud into the world, instead of saying, you know come on down to RP. It's just, to me, it's not authentic. And I know that's kind of the whole crux of what you're doing with appearing 350 times last year. How do you? That's like almost once a day.
It was average more than that because I started on March 18th. Well, like for 3 months, it was just me. And then, in July, I started getting other people involved. And, it just kind of went up from there. And I expect to, I'm serious when we've got to try and keep up with HubSpot updates at the very least. And if we can't match the 1-to-1 like update like ratio, which Kyle cannot do by himself, right? Then we'll always be behind. There will always be a knowledge gap, and that knowledge gap will always get in the way of what we're trying to accomplish and what our customers are trying to accomplish. Um, and
HubSpot has a knowledge gap too, by the way, or a response gap. Like, to me, that feedback loop, and they've done a great job with this, but it's equally not as possible for them to listen to our feedback and say, like, it'd be great today's date. It'd be great, like, it'd be great, all this other stuff. And so there's this Kyle, very much this. I think this is what there's this like iceberg of exploration of new functionality. You know what a factorial is? Like, I
yeah,
knew this in math in high school or whatever. Just the amount of options for use cases is getting into the like the E on your calculator
Oh yeah.
numbers. And so once one new thing is introduced, it's like people that are that at this bottom level, they've been around, they've been doing it like yourself, they've been doing it forever. They have really good not only technical ability, but strategic, like philosophical ability. Like, yes, you could do that, but it's not the best way. Or yes, you should do this, and here's why. Like life cycle stages, right? Like there becomes this feedback loop that's like, oh, actually, HubSpot, if you've added all this stuff, here's this cluster of features. If you did these other one, two things, we'd be able to now solve this much bigger, larger, deeper problem that would have this amount of impact on whatever business uses it. So that they do again an unbelievable job with building things they I guess have heard or have had on a roadmap for a while. But like and I know the roadmap is like cloudy, misty, blurry, and it should be. You have to. I feel like that where I'm going is they have to create space to allow for stuff like what if they'd been working? This is a can of worms. What if they'd been working on this like massive, amazing like attribution like integration with TikTok that was going to change the game and revolutionize how companies like got customer data in from TikTok. And Saturday or whenever it is, like, okay, well they should probably abandon that and focus on something else. The roadmap and the space and allowance for feedback, I think, goes both ways.
Yeah. Oh, the agility required. Like, and that's where when you understand they have like 100, 200 product teams, like that's where the focus is. That's why they can move so fast. Like you literally have people focusing on just the importing experience. That's it. So that's why you get a bunch of updates that is so hard to keep up with. Like, and unless for me, unless I'm doing a daily show, there's no like I'm not even with that. I'm still, but like today, importing, find and replace like during imports now, like insanely valuable, right? And I remember talking to George when we started the customer platform hug last last summer, um, which we're not going to continue this year because we've got lots of ways. Like the goal is educating people on customer platform, right? Um, and but the idea, especially with product updates, it forces you to always talk about new stuff, right? And as something as impactful as Commerce Hub comes into play, right? Now you have invoices. Okay, what does that mean for all of the legacy tools that exist, like Marketing Hub? Like, when are we taking time to understand how the game has changed, right? And that's where I think this is where alignment across the ecosystem is so important. Like, if unless we get to a standardized definition and talking points around things like customer platform, it's impossible to keep up because when every like you say, when every new thing comes out, there's new things that are possible. There's old things that are no longer possible, but you did because you had workarounds, and now it's like a question of do you undo the workaround and switch the new thing? And there's new things to do with old tools that you thought you couldn't do before. And just all that's why I'm suggesting that this approach is one it's sustainable, but it can also be done in a way that you don't know where it's going to hit. And that's where it's very much in line with when you introduce HubSpot to a new company, everybody is going to have a different aha moment. Every single user will have a different aha moment, and you don't know what it's going to be. Like, if you've ever introduced HubSpot to a sales team, like there are, it feels like these things should be no brainers, like meeting links, like all these quick wins, right? But meeting links, templates, sequences, just the ability to see data like on an index view that they couldn't before. I've seen it in real time, just like you're having the same conversation that you had last week. And last week it wasn't an aha moment. This week it is an aha moment, right? And it's like you said about you can't like force them into the pain or speed them up into the pain. You also can't like if you miss the window, like in your farming harvesting analogy, like if you're trying to sell me something that helps me like do the harvesting
Yep.
and you do it 6 months before harvesting time or 1 month after harvesting time, like you miss the window,
Yeah.
right? And that's happening. Like, I think that is, and I'm just trying to create common language about how we present this to leaders because once you're in it, when you're in the community experiencing this stuff, it is so obvious why this works,
You
right?
should write. I just figured out the name
And
for your book, by the way, which is uh, The Impact of Good Tech on Bad Morale. With all this tech and with all this AI and kind of the dynamic between humans and robot, whatever you want to call it, right? It's like, it, think about having to be a RevOps army of one and have to know everything there is to know. Like, that's draining. It's confusing. There's not clarity. What you're talking about is the moments of clarity and aha that's like, you mean my life's not going to suck as bad anymore? Like, even in some small way. You mean this problem is gone? There's almost this like catharsis that comes with continuity, connectivity, clarity, like the three C's of you experiencing something. What we've been confusing that with from like a dopamine level is novelty. You can send a video now um, with like people's names in it. That's cool for a minute. Why do we need that? You know what I mean? Like, so that's if you can make sure that some of these things aren't novel and that your reaction emotionally, psychologically to them is like genuine and can be replicated, like I feel like that's why people will fall in love, quote unquote, with HubSpot, and that the outside is like HubSpot people are a cult, and what it's like. Well, go enjoy your, you know, go enjoy whatever else. We have something that has now provided continuity, clarity, connectivity across the seas are really, I feel like, popular with HubSpot in some of their slogan campaigns. But that's what it does. And to your point, having seen that and having seen that probably, I don't know, 2 or 3 or 4 times, like just as many times as you're on air live in communities and in like in real organic spots per day is why you're such an advocate. I mean, there's probably a lot of reasons, but that has to be one of them. It is not, it can't all be technical. It can't all be like, oh, this is logical. This makes sense. Some of it is like, I've heard people say they've had their life change. My life has been changed by even being in proximity to HubSpot. Do you know how
oh
powerful
yeah,
that shit is? Like that.
yeah,
So it's not just the like, this is a little bit easier. It's like there's life change is probably also pretty extreme, but I have a really extreme, weird, real weird story. But that's the type of effect that I feel like makes recurring value possible.
yeah,
Like recurring value. It solved this problem. It solved this series of problems for me. And I have confidence and trust, by the way, not just trust in people, but trust in the product, trust in that brand to continue delivering on the promise of value on a recurring basis. Think about the update flood and all of this. It's like, do you have trust that you're going to have stuff to talk about for 2025? What's
yes,
your
I do.
confidence level, 0 to 100? Probably
100.
infinite.
Yes, yeah. No, I think like, and I do think that it comes back to, the way that you answer the question of, is this going to build trust? M- More often than not, is the person going to find it valuable?
Yes.
And if the answer is no, then how could trust be built? Right. That's why the actual name of the book is like Value First. It's a Value First framework. Um, because you see a lot of people
So your
understanding
second
that
book.
we got to bring value, right? But you literally cannot when you're trying to force it through. the GTM motions that have been quote unquote working because we get the visibility we want, we get the feel good that we want, uh, based on the systems that we're buying. I mean, I have been feeling this for a long time, but I couldn't always show it, right? Like there's a lot of like learn how to do things the wrong way. Like I know all this stuff doesn't work. I don't have a a vast history of like the good results. But and one of the things I was missing, like I could talk a big game about why ERPs are so like uh, you know, can be destructive and the way they've been delivered doesn't make sense. And when talking to a manufacturer, like they don't understand that people don't want to just log into a bunch of different systems, especially sales teams, right? This summer, I got to witness a NetSuite sales pitch, right? And they brought a partner in. This is like, so you see all this data out there. They have this thing, it's like this 90-day implementation plan, full ERP, like like there's so much bad feedback about that, like about people not getting what they want, it's out of scope, blah blah blah, it costs way more than initial, right? All the classic SaaS like complaints. um and so I helped the client I was working with, call that out right away. Like, look, that's the game, we're not interested. So they catch the drift really quickly and they bring in a partner, right? That's going to be able to customize and configure and all this stuff. And I was not on the side of NetSuite at this point. There was another, just since we're dropping names, is NetSuite and Acumatica was the other ERP, right? And I'd met the guys from Acumatica. I believed it's a very HubSpot-like feeling as soon as you start looking at their Open Academy and it's like all these things. It's like they're just doing the HubSpot playbook. And but I sat there like on a lunch listening to this NetSuite and the partner, the sales, the partner, it was brilliant. I was like, man, this guy knows his shit. Like this is like, okay, I feel good now. Like this is a good decision to make. I can't like he said everything, he could answer every question, right? He was just he was a professional, right? We get to the end of the year, guess what's costing a lot more money than expected because it wasn't in scope.
Yep.
Oh, we didn't have. Oh, we said we could do those things, but we didn't put it in the scope. That's all customized work to be done. So it's an it's an extra $100,000 like of unplanned budget, and that was like, and I was like, I'm sorry, dude. Like I didn't. I now I learned what questions to ask, like when I was at that lunch, right? That I didn't have it because I didn't experience it, right? Like, or so that was just like a masterclass in understanding that piece of why we are where we are and why I say with 100% confidence that SaaS is responsible like for the breakdown because those situations don't happen if you're not trying to create profitability that is not focused on customer success,
Yeah,
right?
that's a good way to put it.
Like, you know that when you said things during the sales process that they got all excited about, and that you delivered a scope and proposal that does not include those things. Like, there's no way you can honestly tell me that that is a customer first, like, thought process. And that's like the whole managed services industry. Like, it all,
That's
I mean,
another.
if
I mean, it's a full episode of like how to scope and how to that whole buying and selling process is like we've experienced some. So I mean, we've I'll say spent almost all of last year figuring out how to make like destroy that from happening, period. Which
Yeah.
that's like a point of pride for our 2024 is that like we're gonna have reduced the amount of times that scoping questions are brought in like to question or like messed up or botched or whatever by 100%. We're gonna do away with that because the intent is to getting into an engagement with the intent to just win like doesn't create trust for the long term. Like customers, if they have a good experience, I would feel like they want to be retained. So how do you start an engagement with the end of lifetime value in mind? What you just said is not it. Not at all. That is kind of like growth at all costs. That was their addiction. I think
Right.
this was Costco, and I don't know the number or the metric, but like their margins, I think, are like intentionally incredibly low, and they will remain that way. Like that's why hot dogs are $1.50. And the CEO, I think, has been asked about this. Apparently, it's quite famous. I just heard about it yesterday, but it's like margins are a drug. So yeah, we could easily like become the first quadrillion-dollar market cap company in universe history. But if we start moving them up and we start doing this, we know that we're going to continue doing it. Like there would be no reason for us not to change a hot dog cost to $4. So that's kind of what you're alluding to is like if the guy was that good and if it was so professional, then it's almost now looking back like even more egregious if that was like not
Yeah.
put into or explained or confirmed. Like you click a button, you sure? Are you really sure? Like I'm telling you, this is something that's going to cost more later. Yeah, man.
Yeah.
But we could talk about scope for. I don't think we
Yeah.
have enough time.
And I'm oh yeah. No, like I think we'll wrap after this. Like, and there's some more content on the way about this because this is where we're at and this is how deep it goes. And like you say, every conversation, and this is like a blessing and a curse, like my ADHD mind being able to connect all these dots, right? Every conversation reveals, either a confirming data point or a new point of view that I wasn't aware of, and maybe I need to change, how I think about it. But as you like, because where my mind went is that we're doing some content coming up that's like, how often do you hear, hey, I need help. Do you know anybody who's got experience with the QuickBooks integration? Like, that's the wrong question to be asking. Like, the right question is, do you know anybody who can help me with XYZ? Right? Experience with the integration has zero to do with it, in my opinion. Because if you partner up with somebody who has no idea how to scope effectively, how to answer questions, how to ask questions, right? QuickBooks specifically, post sales systems, that data can come into HubSpot and serve any part of the customer journey. And so often right now, somebody will raise their hand. Yep, I've set that up. So I've set up that integration before. I can help you. And they set it up and not enough questions are asked. And it's like, oh, yeah, you wanted to do marketing automation based on this data, right?
No.
That's what I set up. It's like, no, I need my sales team to understand what's been ordered, right? I need my post sales team to have easy access to like when we do tickets, like help desk. And yet we're in this place of like, especially with post sales systems, so often the answer is no, I don't know anybody because nobody's been doing that in HubSpot.
It.
HubSpot has not been that system. So
Yeah.
good luck finding somebody with that specific ERP's experience that has built an integration for HubSpot, right? And if you do, be careful because they probably aren't up to speed on the whole platform of HubSpot.
We,
So
we we can just by the way. To me, that's not even like yeah, you're getting into that, but it's not even like you just remove the tool entirely. That's like me going to the
Yeah.
doctor and being like, "Hey, I need to lose some weight. I gained 10 pounds in the last quarter," and them saying, "Okay, here's Ozempic." Like, God forbid. The context is that I have a patellar tendon issue and it's holiday season, right? It's like that somebody that took time to ask those questions and dig into the pain is like, that's amazing. Should have gained 20. I'm going to refer you to an orthopedist to fix your knee. Then you'll be able to work out more. So you don't need anything like that's what if they don't even need QuickBooks at all? What if it's more of a structural issue in HubSpot or like that's getting into this diagnostic process and which you could call scoping, but that's what it is. It's like problem diagnostic. It's like the Dr. House of whatever problem you're facing. You need to be incredibly specific because the implications of doing it wrong are just are redoing stuff to take off a solution you implemented that may make the pain worse or different. And there's another weird note here is like from the good like good tech bad morale standpoint and psyche standpoint, people are less willing to talk about pain, especially when it's like severe or recurrent. So in that approach, they may not be willing to dive into that as much. Like people have, people have like I would say the weight or burden or impact of like a failed initiative or missing, you know, goals, targets, metrics creates some sort of like we'll call it professional pain. You don't have scars from happiness. So digging back into that is like not as pleasant. And so there's this dynamic of approaching pain in a sales process that should be more consultative and just candidly empathetic. Like, yeah, we, you know, you hop in like, yeah, we've tried this with 3 other people, this QuickBooks thing, and it hasn't worked. You're like, man, I cannot even imagine. Here's this other solution that we have. Not a good approach. Like, let's
Right.
dig in super deep to what's actually happening now at the fourth time so that you never have to feel that same pain again. Now, just like the 4 knee surgeries I've had, it's not going to be comfortable, but the end result, what you're approaching or what you want to approximate is some sort of cathartic or healing process of whatever pain, professional pain, business pain they're feeling. And so that approach goes a long way. And the only way to get it all the way back to, completing the circle here is with trust. That's it.
Yeah. And it's so hard. Like, that's the point. Like, the overall point. Like, GTMs that do not include community engagement at this level, like, it is very, very difficult for you to be able to have those conversations when you're not already seeing them out in the open. Like, people will unpack their baggage as they talk about their pain when they're ready on their time in the way that they're comfortable. And when you when you see that and when you're a part of that and it happens very organically, like, one, you build trust when you respond in that moment with value and empathy, but also it prepare you learn. Maybe you're not the one that did it. Maybe me and Rob are doing it, but now you learn the way that it can be done. So when you are in the conversation, you can unpack the baggage properly and not just, force the solution, ask the right questions in a delicate way. That's the like this. It's why it's an infrastructure systemic issue, right? Because it feeds on itself constantly. You always feel like you're missing out when you see the next SaaS tool. You see all these other businesses successful. You haven't digitally transformed yet, right? There's so much pressure, right? We could go on forever, I think. Um, it's been a fun one, man. Uh,
I appreciate
I
being here.
think we'll keep the conversation going. And yeah, let's not overthink it. Everybody needs to
Keep it
have an
simple,
awesome
stupid.
weekend. All right. Have a good one, man.
See you, Chris.
Oh, dear.